Hello seniors, you will recognize that I am not here. I do not like missing school, but sometimes I need to be out of the building. So today you are getting the lecture via a YouTube video. So it's the same old PowerPoint as you will see that I gave to the previous class, but instead it is recorded. So some expectations I want to run through with you so that you can get the most out of this and not be behind at all. First, your reading quiz. You will have 2 reading quizzes on the day you return. So reading quiz will be a double reading quiz on Wednesday. It'll be the questions that I would have asked you today plus the questions that are due on Wednesday. Please make sure you're ready for that reading quiz. Also, expectations during this. The expectations around note-taking do not change. You need to have what's on the PowerPoint plus more, right? I will be talking beyond what is on the PowerPoint, and you need to make sure that you are taking it down. Important note for this, I'm going to be underlining things with my stylus here throughout the PowerPoint because there's a good number of words where we need to be talking about the meaning of them, so running through some Latin roots, so just please be ready. Also, please make sure that you are silent. I recognize that I might be talking quickly and I'm not there in the room to pause to make sure people are catching up. So please be silent. If you need the PowerPoint to be paused, this video is not going to fill the whole time. There's space designed in here for you to ask for the substitute leading the class to please pause the video. Please do that in a silent fashion. Get their attention in a polite way, as young adults would. And also make sure that you have points of follow-up. Please make sure that you have points of follow-up. Since I'm not here to answer your questions, you guys are great, especially this class period, great at asking really good follow-up questions. Please write them down. If you want to have the substitute pause the video so you can write down some follow-up questions to ask me on Tuesday, please do that. I'm building in a little bit of time into that lesson so that you guys can ask me follow-up questions to this PowerPoint. So, timing, again, if you guys could be polite, be great seniors, and make sure that we are done, or we are at least on the reflection question. We need to be on the reflection question. The reflection question by 3:15. I want to have you guys have at least 15 minutes to answer the reflection question that comes at the end of the PowerPoint. You'll be using that to start our Do Now in discussion tomorrow, and I will be there. So without any further ado, please turn to a new page in your notebook. Today is September 9th, or today when you are listening to this is September 9th. And today, this lecture is about the origins of the Constitution. We are diving into the origins of the Constitution. We're going to talk about the philosophy of the American Revolution. So where did our framers of our country, where did they get all their ideas from? And what events leading to 1787? 1787, you might be thinking, why isn't he not talking about 1776? 1787 was the year of the Constitutional Convention. So we care a lot more about the Constitution in this class than the Declaration of Independence. But we will still, of course, talk about that very important document. Also, one note while we are going through this, please be careful that you are actually thinking about the significance of what I'm saying, the significance of the note, not simply the bare fact. A lot of this you will have known the basics already because you've taken U.S. history, and I'm going to be recapping a lot of basic U.S. history, except I will be explaining it with a political science bent. I'm going to try to be laying a foundation that we'll then build on when we're learning about the Constitution and analyzing things future in class. So please have an open mind and be taking good notes about how the facts that I'm saying relate to political science. I know you know the history. Push yourself. So, the philosophy of the American Revolution. Why is that important? Why do we care? Well, it is important for us to know what the framers who wrote the Constitution had in mind when they designed it. We're following this rule book, okay? We're following the rule book that they wrote. We need to know what were the ideas behind it so we can tell if we are following true to what they were thinking and what informed it. What was the background impetus for their work? So why is it important? We need to know what the framers were thinking in order to analyze their work. I will say it again, and if you didn't hear it after this time, please ask someone to pause the video. We need to know what the framers were thinking in order to analyze their work. The most central philosopher that we need to be learning about here is John Locke. There are lots of others. You may remember hearing about Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, all these great Enlightenment thinkers. They're all well and good, and they absolutely informed the American Revolution and the writing of the Constitution. But the main one you will need to learn about and know for the AP exam and for this class is John Locke. The reason I have this noted right here, Lockean, this is John Locke's name, in the form of an adjective. So just be ready for when you're reading things on a test, in a book somewhere. If they say a Lockean point of view or something like that, they're talking about John Locke's philosophy, right? You know you are an important person if your last name has been turned into an adjective. We're going to be talking about Madisonian democracy in a little bit. So he's also important to James Madison. Moving on. Locke's philosophy as understood by the colonists, okay? So they studied him, all of them had read either in school or on their own, and they knew John Locke, right? And there were 5 main pieces that they all took away, that we know that they all took away from his philosophy. The first one, to understand government, to understand a just government, to design a just government, you must think about where people are at the state of nature. You must begin with the state of nature. So before we had an organized society, how did humans behave? How did humans behave? The main thing there is that the weak lose and the strong win. Please ignore the typo on the PowerPoint. It says the weak loose. We need to write down that the weak lose, the strong win. So the example that I'd be acting out in front of you if I were there is, I am walking along, I find an antelope or a deer, I am able to somehow track down that deer. I've been successful, right? I have my food. Unfortunately, I was not very smart in taking the antelope back to a more enclosed space, so I'm sitting out in an open field with my dinner, and Mr. Foster walks along. Mr. Foster is larger than me, I recognize that, and he instead has a stick, knocks me over the head with that stick, and I'm unconscious, and he takes my food. In the state of nature, that is completely okay, right? It's not fair that he took that from me, but he was stronger than me, and so he survived. Another way of thinking about this, besides the powerful physical power of individuals, is the smartest, the most persuasive people are the ones that are going to get others to do what they want, right? The smartest person might not be the biggest, but they're able to convince other people around them, okay? They are strong of mind and able to lead those that are weak of mind better. Take a moment, make sure that you have something more written down than besides what is on the PowerPoint for this part that I have here. Take 10 seconds to make sure you have something. Great. I have a seconds timer in front of me, so I know that you actually took 10 seconds. Wonderful. Next important thing. There are natural rights. So from this state of nature, we then have there's natural rights. We are all, simply by being born, have these 3 natural rights. You can already see them on the screen. We have life, liberty, and property. Again, life, liberty, and property. All humans have these rights simply because they were born. Now you might be saying to yourself, hey, that sounds pretty familiar. Didn't Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence, write about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Yes, and if you're thinking that in your head, give yourself a silent pat on the back. Wonderful. However, he was paraphrasing John Locke when he said that, and it was actually an edit in a later version that we now know as the Declaration of Independence to change property to pursuit of happiness, okay? So let's walk through these 3 things, and you should be adding more to your notes as I talk about life, liberty, and property. The unalienable right to life, right? Who has the right to take a life from another human being? It's very hard to argue. It's even in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, right? Everyone has the right to the life. No one has the right to take the life of someone else. Great. Liberty. How is one of us able to say to the other how they're supposed to live? Liberty. We all have the freedom to live our lives as we want. Okay? We have the right to live, and we have the right to live our lives as we want. Then property. What's the point of having that in there? Well, what's the point of living your life how you want, living your life to the fullest extent that you see, and not being able to keep any of the things that you earned for yourself? So that can be the antelope that I track down, or it can be the knowledge and experiences that I've had for myself. It could be the land that I've cultivated. It could be the crops that I take in from the field. Those are mine. No one has the right to take those away from me. Please make sure that you have something down for life, liberty, and property, and what we mean by that. All right, so the next step, we've began with nature, all right? What is life like without any government, right? Well, only the strong survive, but we need to protect the natural rights of all, right? None of us really have the right to take the life or liberty or property from anyone else. So what do we create? We create a social contract, right? A contract. You guys know what contracts are, right? There's goal contracts saying, you're having a contract with yourself. So that's actually not a very good example. Let's use instead a telephone contract, right? You sign a 2-year telephone contract with T-Mobile or whatever, and they are saying, okay, you will pay us X amount of dollars for the next 2 years every month. And in return, we will make sure that that wireless device in your pocket functions, all right? We will send and receive phone calls, we'll send and receive data, we'll send and receive pictures. We'll have this wonderful technology available to you as long as you are paying this amount of money a month. And also there's if they stop doing that, then you don't have to pay anymore. It's a contract. You've got a deal on both sides. The social contract comes from this. We have come together, right? I'm saying a lot here. Please make sure you're noting things down, right? In order to guarantee the life, liberty, and property of one another, we came together and said, hey, let's form this kind of set of rules and have a few of us allowed to enforce those set of rules. That's called government, right? Preserving order. So we have all of us, we're farming our fields, we're chasing down our game, and we say, all right, we need to have a few of us be the ones that police each other, okay, that look out for each other, and if somebody breaks the social contract, they have to enforce the consequence on them, all right? So it's not, no government exists because God told it to. No, there's no divine right as monarchs would believe it. According to John Locke, the governed give permission to the government to exist. That is the only way a government is ever formed. It's formed out of necessity to protect our life, liberty, and property. It's formed out of the necessity to protect our life, liberty, and property, and the government is only allowed to govern as long as the people want it there. It was the people that asked it to exist in the first place, so the government can only work as long as the people want it there. Take 10 seconds. If we need to pause, go ahead and pause. All right, the last two. I won't be as long with these two, I promise. The government should be limited. All right, John Locke and the colonists strongly believed that the government should be limited. So add in, right? The government should be as small as possible. The government's role is to protect life, liberty, and property, and nothing more. Okay? It should be as large as it needs to be to protect life, liberty, and property, but it should not be large enough. It should very, very little infringe on your day-to-day life. You should have your life, be able to live it how you want, and have your property. The government shouldn't be overly taking your property, should not overly be limiting your liberty, and should definitely not be taking your life unless you've done something heinous, vocab word, unless you've done something heinous in your breaking of our social contract with each other. Government should be limited. And the final important piece that leads us to the American Revolution, right, is the right to revolt. If the government that you are asking to have exist, asking to help organize and keep order in your society, okay, is not doing these things, if it is becoming not limited, if it is failing to protect your life, liberty, and property, then you have the right to overthrow it. John Locke said, and the colonists deeply believed, if a government is no longer serving its people, they have the right to revolt. If the government is no longer serving its people, they have the right to overthrow it. Moving on, we are now at the events leading to 1787. All right, this picture is not leading to 1787. This is a most famous painting of the American Revolution. We've got good old George leading the troops across the Delaware. Of course, no one would ever actually be standing in a boat like that in the middle of December in a frozen river, because if he falls in, he'll get hypothermia and die. Anyway, just wanted to give you a context of these are the people we're talking about, right? Brave soldiers that want to have a government, wanting self-government. Great. Well, what led up to 1787 when we created that new constitution that we are still using today? So, revolt from Great Britain. We revolted. We decided. So why did we revolt? The colonists as a whole, okay, their leaders decided that the leadership of King George III of Great Britain was no longer serving them. The king was no longer protecting the rights of their life, liberty, and property fairly, and was no longer an appropriately limited government. Think to yourself real quick, what was their biggest complaint? Silently. Taxation. Hopefully you're thinking about taxes. The colonists got super upset about taxes. Now we know that taxes are important, right? You can't do the other functions of government without collecting taxes. They weren't against the idea of taxes. They were against the idea that they were being taxed but had no representation in the government. They had no effective participation, vocabulary from previous lectures. They had no effective participation in the policy-making process, and therefore the government was no longer appropriately serving them, so they revolted. They revolted. Taxation without representation. Why did they revolt? They were being taxed without giving the permission to the government to tax them in the first place. So, what did they do? They wrote a document, of course, right? They wrote a document, right? They wrote a very strongly worded letter. That's what the Declaration of Independence is, right? It says, it lists out the philosophy. It starts with the philosophy of John Locke, rephrasing it, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, unalienable rights, we're all created equal, right? We're all created equal. You do not have the power to simply tell us what to do. We never gave you permission to do that in the first place. And then it is a specific list of all the problems with the king, and then a big conclusion at the end. Therefore, we have the right to revolt, and we declare ourselves independent from your rule. I want you to make sure that you note that it is a revolution based on ideas. This was not a revolution because the upper class was abusing the lower class. It was they were upset with the philosophical and structure of their government. Very, very, very few revolutions that happened in the world history simply because of ideas. The American Revolution is rare in that. It was simply based on ideas. They didn't agree with the ruling philosophy of the English, and so they said, we're done with you, we're going to go do it on our own. In your book on page 34, I believe it is figure 2.1 or table 2.1. I want you to make sure that you study that. I'm not going to walk through it now. I don't want to bore you to death. But I want you to look at page 34, table 2.1, on your own time. On your own time. Don't move yet. Okay? You can do that after class. In there, you'll see that there is two columns. One column is John Locke's philosophy broken down, just as I broke it down, and then direct comparisons and quotes from the Declaration of Independence. So you can see the parallels of the understanding John Locke's philosophy and exactly how that appeared in the Declaration of Independence. Next, very important, the revolution was not an upheaval of society. The American Revolution was also extremely rare because it was simply based on ideas that didn't upheave the structure of society. Right? Think to the French Revolution for a second. That was one portion of society revolting against the oppression, what they saw as the oppression of a different class of society. That is not what happened here. The colonists had been ruling themselves mostly on their own for over 100 years. They'd been running the colonies, but there were some British governors, and the king was across the ocean and would tell them what to do. When the king from across the ocean told them what to be doing too much, that's when they revolted. So after the American Revolution, the society was conserved, right? This is where I need you to be making sure you're along with this. It was a conservative revolution. The root word here is conserve, right? It kept the same. If you are conserving water, you're saving water. Conserving electricity, you're using less of it, right? Conserving Mother Nature so that it lasts longer, right? Well, it was a conservative revolution. Society did not look dramatically different before or after the revolution. Okay, which is good. There's stability, but there's also the downside of slavery still existed. There was still, the wealthy had a lot of power, but it was still generally an open society, and it stayed that way after the revolution. Significance, I want you to be thinking about that a little bit. I talked about it some in my little rambling there, but this is also going to lead into our reflection question at the end. So I'm going to pause for about 10 seconds so that you can make sure that you have everything down, and if you need the substitute to rewind, go ahead and do so. So, a visual aside before we get back to the events leading to us needing a new constitution. So this visual aside, we're going to focus up here first. I want you to draw in this large circle and 3 smaller boxes in your notes somewhere. Please make sure that the circle is significantly larger than the 3 smaller boxes. Okay? And don't forget these labels. We have the powerful British government is the big circle, and then the colonies are the political subunits. Okay? The size correlates to the amount of power that group had. Okay? Size equals power in this little visual demonstration. Take 10 seconds or pausing to make sure this is in your notes. All right. So, up here, we had before. This is before the American Revolution. Down below, in our Confederate system, this is a visual representation of how the government was set up under the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation. Okay? In the Articles of Confederation, it changed, right? There's a very, very small central government. If you want to label this box, this is the U.S. government under the Articles of Confederation, the U.S. government. Okay, and the colonies, now states, right? These are states. You can't see that at all. States, right? These are the states. Power is concentrated in the subunits, the states. There's a very weak central government, okay? So they are mostly independent, okay, and they sometimes come together to meet a common goal. In this case, the common goal was defeating the British. All right, so thank you for that visual aside. I think it'll be very helpful in then understanding this slide a little bit better and why the Articles of Confederation were different than other things. So, we've revolted, we've successfully thrown off British rule, or we're in the process of it, okay? We've declared ourselves separate. So we are on to our first attempt at self-government, all right? Our first attempt at self-government was not the Constitution, it was the Articles of Confederation. It was the Articles of Confederation. Remember Confederation? So on that visual aside we just had, I talked about it was a Confederate collection of states, okay? It was not a federal government, it was not a united government, it was called a confederacy. They were separate states. They were very separate, okay? It was created during the war. I'm about to add something, please make sure you're adding it to your notes. It was created during the war. It was created out of necessity. The Articles of Confederation were created out of necessity and in reaction to British rule. So it was created out of necessity that we threw off British rule. How are we going to rule ourselves? Well, let's create a document. That was the Articles of Confederation. It was also created as a reaction against British rule. So that was our connection down to here. The philosophy and goals of the Articles of Confederation. First, as I said, it's a reaction against the centralized power of British rule. The colonists, the thing they were most upset about was that the British, from one central place, the king, were deciding all these things for them, right? Who is this one person, who is this small set of governors to tell us, all of us, spread across this giant continent, diverse in all of our different beliefs, how are they to tell us centralized government is completely unjust? Completely unjust, according to them at this moment. They did not want centralized power. Okay? I want you to think to yourself about an example of a kind of harsh reaction to all of a sudden being free from something. Okay? It might be the first time that you realize your family's not around and you behave a little bit differently. Okay? Sometimes our alumni do this, right? And they no longer have someone telling them exactly how they need to be looking when they're at school. They go out and they come back with their nose pierced, all right? A lot of girls from the class of 2013 now have their nose pierced because no one cares that they have their nose pierced anymore. Anyway, just my own little thought. Don't put holes in your face. All right. Seeks to protect individual freedom and local autonomy to guard against tyranny. Big sentence there. I'm going to break it down. Make sure that you are taking notes along with it and sometimes writing points of follow-up. So, important goal of the Articles of Confederation was, first piece, they wanted to protect individual freedom. From the beginning, they wanted that, right? Life, liberty, and property, protect the individual. We talked about individualism. It was here at the beginning. Protect individual freedoms. Keep that government as limited as possible. Articles were purposely super limited to protect the individual. They also wanted local autonomy. They wanted towns and states that had been ruling themselves for over 100 years to continue to be able to make almost all decisions for themselves. They wanted local autonomy, right? Automobile, self-driving car, not self-driving, but self-powered, okay? Auto, self, right? Self-government of the most local, basic government structures. And then guard against tyranny. They were so sick of tyranny, they were so sick of centralized power controlling them unjustly that they put so many they put so many stops and hurdles into the government doing things so that there was no way for the government to be tyrannical. As we'll see in a second, there were so many preventions from it being tyrannical that not a lot got done, which is a problem. Evidence of this is in Article 2, the second article of the Articles of Confederation. Okay, we're not talking about the Constitution. In the Articles of Confederation, it says, quote, each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence. Each state is sovereign, free, and independent? How's that a country then? Currently, so think about today and answer for yourself in your brain, okay? Is the state of Illinois independent to do what it wants? No, okay? Not at all. But back then, they viewed themselves much more as Pennsylvanians, Massachusetts, Connecticutans, I don't even know what that would be, okay, Rhode Islanders, Virginians. They viewed themselves much more by their state, okay, than as Americans. The idea of being American hadn't come around yet. They were sovereign. So at the end of the day, Massachusetts could do what it wanted. Which leads us to this next piece. It's a voluntary union of states. Voluntary union of states, which means they could leave if they wanted to, or they could not listen to what the national government decided because they saw themselves as sovereign. We can see the problems brewing already, right? Massachusetts doesn't like what Connecticut's doing. Okay, Connecticut and Pennsylvania and New York are all doing. They don't have to follow it. They see themselves as completely separate. It also means that there's no one that can then make them all work together. There's nothing that can force them to all work together. Please contrast this with the Constitution and Abraham Lincoln, right? When the southern states decided that they wanted to break away, he said, no, that's illegal. That's not how our Constitution works. You cannot leave just because you want to leave. In the Articles of Confederation, states could leave if they wanted to leave because they were technically, in their own brain, sovereign and independent from one another. Also, goal of the Articles of Confederation is good for them. They wanted to expand liberty for all. White men, unfortunately. Sad face. Okay? Expanding liberty for all. There were some limitations in some states previously about who could vote. Under the Articles of Confederation, we started the proud American tradition of expanding who was allowed to vote. All right, so this is our second to last slide. Structure of the articles. This is important to note. My apologies that the bullet points are oddly aligned. Don't know what happened there. Anyway, So the structures of the article is going to lead to the problems that we see down below. You probably want to be thinking about how they match up with one another. Structures of the articles. The central government had no fiscal powers. Fiscal equals financial. Money. Okay? The central government wasn't allowed to deal with money. They weren't allowed to collect taxes. Okay? They didn't have a budget to spend anything on. Okay? So let's think back. We know that a government needs to collect taxes in order to do anything, in order to do the other four functions of government. We can see the problems already, right? They had no way to collect money, okay, and they weren't even allowed to have a treasury. Okay? Next, there was no central executive to operate the government. Currently, we have the executive branch, all right? The root word there is execute. Please make sure that you have that noted. To execute is the root word. All right? Nowadays, executive, to talk about an executive suite or an executive suit, all right? Those all take on some high and mighty thing, but really the word executive means the person that carries out a rule or law, right? So there was no executive to carry out any of the national government. So their Congress could come together and make a decision, but then there was no other branch they could turn to then say, hey, enforce this law. So they could make decisions, but there was no one to then enforce the laws. Next, no central judiciary to settle state-to-state disputes. Judiciary, right? The courts. There were no courts to mediate when one state got into an argument with another. So if Massachusetts getting really angry at people from Rhode Island for fishing off of their shores, okay, there's no one to settle that dispute. Because remember, they're sovereign, right? They can do what they want. There's no one to settle that dispute. Think about it for a second. When there's no one there to settle an argument between two people, it turns into a fight, right? What happens when there's no one there to settle an argument between two large groups of people? A war, right? Luckily that didn't happen, but it could be very easy for it to, over time, turn into that if there's no one to ever force people to get along. Next piece is a unicameral Congress, so one house. A unicycle has how many wheels? 1. A bicycle has how many wheels? 2, right? Currently we have a bicameral legislature, a bicameral Congress. We have the House and the Senate. That was not the case under the Articles of Confederation. It was unicameral, one house, and in that house, each state only got one vote. So at the beginning, there were only 13 votes to be cast. Right? And also, to approve amendments, to approve any amendment to the Articles of Confederation, so if they were to see problems, say, hey, let's fix this problem of not having fiscal powers, everyone would have to agree to it. Unanimous. Everyone. Okay? Unanimous. Do large groups of people ever agree on everything? No. So it's very difficult for anybody to agree on that. All right? Unanimous. Difficult. All right. Here we go. Problems with the articles. And you can see the connections up here. If you want to be drawing lines to connect which one connects to the other, that's very good. Also, problems with the Articles of Confederation. You will need to, on your own, at some point very soon, be able to explain why the Articles of Confederation didn't work. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You need to understand this slide very well for something coming up soon. So, problems with the Articles. The national government had no teeth to enforce any agreements. So if Massachusetts and the other states, I don't know why I keep coming back to Massachusetts, let's use Pennsylvania for a second. If Pennsylvania, okay, didn't want to all help pay in some way the soldiers that just won the war against Great Britain, they didn't have to. There was no one to force them, okay? There's also no one to force the citizens to abide by the rules that are made by the national government. It had no teeth. It had no power to really do anything. That's a problem. Next, the national government couldn't collect taxes. Back up there to the financial powers. They didn't have any fiscal powers. They couldn't collect taxes. If the government can't collect taxes, it can't provide public services. It can't very well preserve order. Okay? And practically, historically thinking, all right, make sure you note this, the national government, if it can't collect taxes, how on earth are they going to pay those soldiers that just won a war for them? Big problem there. Compounding to it. Sorry that it got cut off. State governments were bankrupt. Okay, so historically speaking, the second two are big issues. The state governments didn't have any money. They were just born, so to speak, right? They were just decided that they were free. Okay, they really didn't have a lot of money. Okay, because they were already on their own paying people for the war. They were bankrupt. They had no way to get money. Okay, there wasn't a lot of places to get it. And the national government, right, the group they formed together, couldn't ask for loans from anyone else because they didn't have fiscal powers. So none of the government operations had any money, but they had bills to pay, and people weren't getting paid. There's a very last thing that caught off. My apologies. So I'm going to say it multiple times. Please make sure you note it. Okay. Another problem of the Articles of Confederation is that interstate, so between states, interstate problems began to boil. Interstate problems began to boil. Again, because there's no one there to settle in state-to-state disputes. Interstate problems began to boil. There's a very good specific example that's in your book and you learned about last year. I'm not going to talk about it here because you all are very good readers and can look it up for yourself. But Shays' Rebellion. You should know about Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was an extremely good example of the Articles of Confederation not doing what they should. Because of Shays' Rebellion, the framers were scared, okay, that something like that would happen, and they decided that they need to rewrite how they govern themselves. Please relook up Shays' Rebellion, make sure it is in your notes, and that you understand it. If we need to answer questions about it on Tuesday, we will do so. All right, reflection question. Here we go. We need to answer this for our notes. Since the American Revolution conserved colonial society, how would this be an advantage to the leaders trying to form a new country and government? Since the American Revolution conserved colonial society, how would this be an advantage to leaders trying to form a new country and government? Please explain your answer in detail with examples, historical, so if you remember lots of history, you can use examples from there, or you can make up your own hypothetical examples. That is completely fine too. All right? Please take the remainder of class to answer this question. All right? You do not need to write down the question. Do not waste your time and fake your effort by writing down the question. Please write down your answer. Okay? The same slide will appear when you start discussion section tomorrow. Thank you for listening. I hope that this format worked.